Judge Jeremy Richardson sentenced 61-year-old Peter Lynch to 3 years behind bars for showing up at one of those protests which sprang up after the Southport killings, shouting at the police and waving a placard around. Peter Lynch committed suicide in prison quite recently. Might be worth taking a look at what he actually did to earn his death sentence. This is as good a source as any. A grandfather who was jailed after hurling abuse at police officers outside a hotel housing asylum seekers has died in prison. Peter Lynch was locked behind bars for more than 2 years after he was caught on camera screaming scum and child killers at officers alongside a mob that had gathered outside the Holiday Inn. Lynch was jailed for 2 years and 8 months after body-worn camera footage was shown to the court of him screaming, "You are protecting people who are killing our kids and raping them," and scum at police with riot shields. He was then filmed repeatedly challenging officers as they tried to push him back with shields, screaming, "Protect my children," repeating and yelling, "We are on the streets now to protect our kids." So this is the sum total of the words and phrases attributed to him that led to his death sentence. And he was also carrying this placard which does nothing worse than make allegations against various agencies of the establishment. Some video footage also emerged of him standing in the crowd and holding that placard. There was clearly some interaction with the police as well at some point, described by the Independent as screaming at the police, and we have some video footage of that as well.
Scum! Praying for
Get
our
back
children.
from the shield!
I pray for my children. I pray for my children. I pray
back.
Get back from the shield!
As you saw, a screaming banshee cop actually hit him with her riot shield. She was the violent one, not him. And that does seem to cover at least some of what was reported of him saying, and a bit more. They seem to have left out the "I pray for my children" bit. And that probably was the approximate nature of everything else. So we seem to have a video record of pretty much everything there is. Placard holding and a bit of shouting, and that seems to be pretty much it. These judges, like I said in the last video, have absolutely no idea of what they're communicating. Lynch of Berman Road, Wath upon Dearne, had pleaded guilty to violent disorder and was told by Judge Jeremy Richardson KC, "You did not yourself attack any police officers as far as can be detected, but what you did was encourage by your conduct others to behave violently, and you were part of this mob. I have no evidence you did anything violent, but I really wish you had, because then I could have given you the life sentence, which I really wish I could give you," and he did, as it turns out. So I'm going to plant a doubt in the mind of the listeners. Maybe you did do something violent, because I really don't like you. That's what "as far as can be detected" means. Totally redundant phrase which tells you everything you need to know about this establishment piece of work. 3-year prison sentence, which was actually a death sentence, because you had an average non-criminal bloke who gets involved in these anti-immigration protests, gets handed a totally disproportionate jail sentence, which he has no way of coping with because he has no prison experience, and he ends up not coping. So Judge Jeremy Richardson, dressed in his finery and surrounded by lovely paintings in his office here, walks out into court and sentences him to death. But Judge Jeremy Richardson, seen here wearing his executioner's wig and looking beautifully solemn, he isn't always so mean. Jeremy has a lenient side when it comes to dealing with paedophiles. This was Jezza from an earlier stage in his career. "You have never had a full sexual relationship. It must be very frustrating. Judge's pity for predatory sex attacker as he spares him jail for stalking underage schoolgirls." Andrew Jackson, 48, twice stalked schoolgirls aged 13 and 14 and sexually assaulted a disabled woman in Bridlington, East Yorkshire. Judge says he should go to prison but spares him as it would be cruel. Jackson given sexual offences prevention order and community order. Andrew Jackson, 48, was told that he deserved a prison sentence, but as he has Asperger's syndrome, sending him to jail would be be utterly cruel. Jackson is known to follow young girls on his moped and cause them distress, often by striking up sexual conversations with them. Passing sentence at Hull Crown Court, Judge Jeremy Richardson QC told him, "You have never had a full sexual relationship. It must be very frustrating. I wish to make it plain you deserve to be sent to prison, but you are very much to be pitied. I have a public duty, but it would be quite wrong to impose a cruel punishment. Quite frankly, you could not cope in prison. I have no doubt your life would be a misery." How bizarre that, for his lack of presumed coping ability, this convicted abuser is treated with compassion, while the bloke who shouted a bit and didn't actually hit anybody is given a death sentence. Apparently Jezza is not concerned about his coping ability at all. And things don't get better as Jezza pleads with the press to not disclose the name of, you guessed it, a sex attacker. What else would it be? This is the full article. I'm not going to read it all, as it is all worth reading and it's quite hard to do edited highlights, so you can pause the video if you want to read the lot. In brief, a woman brings a complaint against this fellow of historical sexual abuse, which is described in the article. Jezza, seen here again, this time in a more discreet wig. I thought the earlier one was a bit girly. Jezza the executioner getting in touch with his feminine side. He requests that the paper not publish the name of the convicted attacker because he is reformed and it would be stressful for his children. The paper says F off, describing it as a slap in the face for the victims of sexual abuse, and I will read out the editor's comments at the end of the article. Speaking to HTFP, Andrew explained why the Weekender had decided to go against the judge's wishes. He said, "It's a concerning trend, as where do you draw the line? I understand his children and his family may suffer, but if we start to not publish offenders' names and make a precedent for doing so, then it will become a regular request. Also, it is likely that these requests will be made for more serious cases, which will have far-reaching repercussions for those involved, rather than in, say, burglary cases. It seems something of a slap in the face for victims of sexual assault, particularly in Rotherham being ground zero for the grooming gangs, particularly in Rotherham, who are repeatedly being asked to come forward and report offences for the judge to then ask the offender to be protected by having his name kept out of the public domain. Also, it is incredibly disturbing for a judge to blame journalists for something that might happen. If we were to reverse the situation, it would be the equivalent of us saying in open court that if the defendant is spared prison and commits further offences, it is the judge's fault." He added, "I think it is hard enough for victims to come forward and for police and the CPS to get cases to court without a judge making these sorts of comments." As he says, with a precedent set, it might then start to be exploited in more serious cases, to quote him, rather than in, say, burglary. Yes, I can't see Jezza being too worried about burglary somehow. And we are not done just yet. Jezza is also all up in arms about paedophile hunters. You thought I was going to say paedophiles there, didn't you? No. Paedophile hunter groups are at risk of becoming criminals themselves, says Hull's top judge. Judge Jeremy Richardson, wouldn't you know it, has spoken out about the controversial topic. Again, it's too long to read out. Have a look for yourselves if you want. Oh, there he is again. And that's the lot. To sum all that up, one Matthew Quinton was caught by a paedophile hunter group who set a trap for him. Jezza the executioner is concerned they might be committing the crime of incitement. It should be left to the police, and, drumroll please, thirdly, in a civilised society, and we do live in a civilised society, the responsibility for the enforcement of criminal laws lies with the police. They are the correct law enforcement agency. Clearly so, because they did so well with the grooming gangs. Or to put it another way, they did absolutely nothing whatsoever. They turned a blind eye, which is probably what motivates these paedophile hunter groups to act by themselves. Jezza is not happy with these groups going fishing for paedophiles and catching them. He'd rather the police did whatever the police do. Historically, that would be nothing. And he lets them off because they might not cope in prison, and he urges the press to not publish their names, which the press gratifyingly give him the middle finger over. But when a man carries a placard voicing suspicions about the nature of the establishment, and he follows that up with some choice and not particularly offensive words directed at immigrants and the police, Jezza sentences him to death. Oh, hang on, this is hyperbolic. He didn't sentence him to death, he sentenced him to 3 years, and unfortunately he committed suicide. Yes, he did actually. Jezza knew the risk, and we know that he knew the risk because he is on record as saying so. Remember, addressing child abuser Andrew Jackson, he said, "Quite frankly, you could not cope in prison. I have no doubt your life would be a misery." And in fact, he went on to say, Judge Richardson said justice demanded he took a thoroughly exceptional course and showed that the courts were not without compassion in ignoring sentencing guidelines and sparing Jackson the ordeal of prison. Jeremy Richardson is on record as being cognizant of the risks. He is on record ignoring sentencing guidelines. He knew the risks of sending an otherwise entirely non-criminally orientated man to jail for 3 years. He knew it could have catastrophic consequences. He didn't have to do it, and he has a history of not doing it. And he went ahead notwithstanding. Peter Lynch's death is down to Jeremy Richardson, and I wonder how proud he is of the fact.